That was a weird noise. What is what? That was me, you jerk. I also just realized that I never took my meds this morning. So that's great. Woo!
The American Quilt Study Group presents Quilts in the Material World.
Hello, friends. I think that my mic is working okay. Let's see. All right, so, volume very low. I did have the music turned down pretty low, because it was blasting my eardrums. So hopefully my volume is good. Okay, come up a little bit. Let's see. Is that a little better? I'm not blowing anybody's eardrums out. Every time Jill and I try something new, something nuts happens. So yeah, today has been a day, let me tell you. It's been a day for me in a way that has nothing to do with quilts. I so wish I could have spent time on quilts today thus far, but I'm glad to be here now. So yeah, I have poor Jill sitting over here. You can talk now, by the way.
Oh, I'm allowed? Okay.
Yeah, you're allowed.
I was trying to be good.
Yeah, and I will put you on the screen as soon as I can. Like I said, today's been a day, and I don't have my screen set up properly. Nah.
Hello, I am disembodied voice from the void.
Yeah, here, I will share my other screen. So now, hopefully everybody can see both me and Jill. What does this look like? Yeah.
Yeah.
I put this video, we're going to watch a video today. I put it in theater mode, and I think that Twitch or OBS, which is my software, doesn't love it. So, lessons learned here right now. I have some tweaks I need to do for this next time, but I think I'm getting better at getting stuff to work here. Between co-streaming and adding stuff in, it's something else. So anyway.
Druid, I'm definitely not in her house. I'm definitely in my house. Well, I'm in a different house than you're used to seeing, but no, we're not physically together.
Yeah, we're not physically together. So how are you guys doing? I feel like the chat was super busy. Just lots of you guys talking. So, Druid, my darling, as always, thank you so much for what you do. Kellen, hello. Goth Gremlin, hi, welcome. Kate who cooks, my dear, hello. I think that's everybody that has shouted out. I know I have lurkers, though. I love my lurkers. So what was I gonna say? But today was a little bit crazy. We are gonna watch
lots of things culminating at the last minute.
Yes, things are culminating. And I've mentioned before some of the stuff that I do outside of this is totally unrelated, and it's sometimes really hard to do that switch back and forth. And today just happened to be one of those days, and I can tell you, Monday's going to be that way too. So be prepared, you guys. Luckily, though, I will do my stream first, and then after my stream, I will switch over to my other thing. So anyway, instructional design, the work never ends for instructional designers. So just like every other profession out there. So I'm going to switch back to my big screen real quick. And Jill, you can still talk. They'll still be able to hear you. Because I want to show you something I got. And I think this
toys without me.
Well, it's a book. I got a book. And it's such a ridiculous book, but you guys are gonna know exactly what it's about. So my husband and I were talking recently, and I don't even remember what we were talking about, but we got on the topic of a specific thing from our childhood, from our youth, and I was like, oh my god, it's just such a funny thing. So I went out and I found a book about it. Now, yeah. Did anybody ever wear legs pantyhose, or your mom wore legs pantyhose?
Mm-hmm.
And you had the legs eggs? This is a book on things you can make with legs eggs.
Do you
And
have a bunch of eggs lying
I
around?
I do not. But this was like a $3 book, and I mean, God bless the people that sold it to me because they didn't charge shipping and it came really fast. So I was like, wow. Not only
Wow,
did
so they
yeah,
paid you to take it?
basically they lost money on this book, and I was like, oh, you poor people, but I want this book. It's so funny. But yeah, like just the crazy stuff in here. I mean, look at this. I wish I had.
The planter thing's pretty cool.
Yeah, look at this. So this is like one of those Easter eggs, one of those fancy decorated Easter eggs, and somehow or another you got this hole in there that you can see a little picture. This involves getting literally like a cake decorating set and putting colored acrylic gel in it to make this.
Wow, they got nothing on Fabergé.
Yeah, I mean, some of this stuff I'm like, yeah, like paint your egg and then put some lace on it. Make it into an ornament. That's pretty normal, right?
But those eggs are... That would be a big ornament.
Yeah, they are. They're fairly large eggs. Look at this one. Paint them silver, and then with some PVC pipe and are they labeled? Yeah, they've got these fancy labels on them. And then you will have eggs full of screws and tacks and nuts and nails.
So far, the only one I'm really getting on board with is the planter.
Yeah, some of these are very impractical. You want to look like you are a very talented movie star? You could put these fake lights around your mirror.
All right, that's terrible.
Some of them don't even they totally get rid of the egg. So like the egg is inside there. But I'm like, why wouldn't you just? And this is for string and tape dispensers. So why would you even use the egg? Like. Let's see. And this is it doesn't say what this is. Oh, okay. You guys know what these are. This isn't the eggs at all. This is what the eggs come in. And I don't know, do they have a picture in here in case? Okay. So for the sweet summer babies who have never seen, or maybe if you live in another country and you've never seen these, although I think Legs was international. But just in case, this is what they look like. This is how they were marketed. And you can see it's like a canister type thing. And then the egg would sit in there. And when I tell you these eggs are big, they're like yay big. Right?
It probably would have been cool if they'd made the canister the egg sits in like a koozie. So like you got like a can koozie for... Mm-hmm. Wouldn't that be cool?
Yeah, sure.
Are they still around? Are they a thing anymore?
They do. Actually, Legs still exist. It's owned by Hanes, but the eggs don't. They don't use the eggs anymore. I mean, these are single-use plastics, y'all. Mm-hmm. These are not, people don't like these things anymore. But what they remind me of, in case you're still trying to wrap your head around this, Easter eggs. The plastic Easter eggs that come apart in two halves, that's exactly what they were. They were just big. Like they were... Mm-hmm. Ostrich egg sized? I don't know. No, they probably weren't that big. But yeah, they were like, this big. Anyway, I just had to share this. I thought I need another book, like I need a hole in my head, but it's kind of cool what look at this. You can make this fancy looking little planters.
Yeah, I like the planters.
Yeah, some vases. There's a lot of stuff with plants. Oh yeah, here's the one that is on the front cover that you're probably... like a little planter tower.
Yeah, I feel like that's something you can buy at IKEA right now.
Oh, here. You can saw at them, saw a slot in them, and they're a placeholder.
Okay.
Yeah, with
Yeah, the little card holder things. Yeah.
So the canister part, you could put your snacks in, and then you can use the egg part to serve those snacks. There's a lot of spray paint involved here. Okay. This one you guys are going to die. If you were around for Margaret Eccles, her book, it's a Christmas book with Christmas quilt projects in it, but it has faux fruits and vegetables as well. Well, you can make some legs, eggs, vegetables to go with them. Look at that. You can make a lettuce.
Do
You can make...
Do you think those would ever be as highly sought after as like the velvet fruits we see in antique stores?
One never knows.
I think they could give them a run for their money.
This is kind of cute. To put a gift inside and then, you know, like, that's cute. Just like Easter eggs, right? Oh, a sewing kit.
Well, I was about to say, like, if they figured out the cookie tins, did no one come up with so that's not half bad. That's not half bad.
A jewelry case. You can line it with silky stuff. So yeah, now, make yourself some birds. There's the owl. And that's a parakeet.
Oh, those are actually kind of cute.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. They have, what is this? Legs for kids. So they have all kinds of, oh look, you can make a little tom-tom. I didn't realize when I bought this. I thought this was all specifically for the eggs, but this is for the cartons too. The little cardboard cartons, which is nice, you know, to provide some things. Oh, look at this bee. This bee has got an attitude. I just can't get over this. Oh,
yeah,
here's
that bee.
There's
that
a pumpkin.
Bee has like, it looks like Dumbo ears.
Well, it's the wings. It's the wings.
I know, but it totally looks like ears.
Oh,
Jack
look.
O' pretty cute.
Make yourself a puppet. There's just, I mean, this is so 1970s kind of.
Did people have, that's the puppet thing's terrifying. Did people have just like 700 eggs lying around?
My mom always had a bunch of them, yeah.
I don't remember my mom having that many of them.
Yeah, she would go and buy, like, I guess when her, here's those shade selections for the pantyhose. Yeah, you know, when she was working a job where she had to wear pantyhose every day, she would buy, I don't know, every few weeks she'd buy a couple of them, so, and I think my grandmother used them too. She wore them too, so, you know, there was eggs around in the family, so, yeah, this is a very dated thing.
What's the date on that book?
Oh, yeah, I was gonna say, 1976. So, do they not have a bicentennial project? I don't think they do. But anyway, I love craft books. I love things like, you know, they tell you so much about the time, you know, what is of the time. And I think about craft books, you know, just from the past couple decades, there are things that just not available anymore. You know, I mean, you could do all those projects. You could probably get large eggs, you know, like at the craft store. So you could do those projects, but the eggs don't exist anymore. Although I looked on eBay, you can buy new old stock of legs. I noticed somebody had they made a holiday variety that were silver and gold, and then I think there was like red and green that were like metallic, and then they had Easter ones that were pastels. And I think they might have had another one. I can't remember. I saw on eBay. So, but all you have to do is eggs on eBay, and you'll get all of them. It's pretty funny stuff. All right. So, I think that is an interesting piece of material culture. And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but these are the kind of things that, I mean, it's like the detritus of our lives, you know? Hey, Eva. It's good to see you. Puppet of your nightmares, yeah. Oh, astroturf-sized, yes, Druid. Oh, Kate, yes, she used stockings, the used ones to stuff pillows. Yes, that's something that a lot of people, I've talked to a lot of people like back, you know, 80s, 70s, 80s, that, and craft projects that would tell you if you need to stuff something, stuff it with nylons. My grandparents definitely used, you know, stockings to, like, they tie tomato plants up with you know, knee highs, stuff like that. It just always grossed me out. I don't want a toy stuffed with your old used stockings. Or those blankets, like I don't know if you saw the puff quilt that what's his name, Rocky. Oh gosh, it was the guy at the Met Gala that had the puffy quilt that he wore.
Oh,
Rocky
oh,
Rocky dollar signs up there. I can't remember what the rapper's name is, but if you know what I'm talking about.
Was it like ASAP
ASAP
Rocky?
Rocky, yes, ASAP Rocky. He had, this was the Met Gala 2 years ago, I think, and he had this quilt, and it was a puff quilt, and so each of the blocks were like, you know, a little piece, and the way that you kind of make like a miter, like a little tuck, and then you sew all of these together, and they'd be stuffed, you know, like just a little ball of stuffing in there just to make it like squishy. You don't use batting, and that as a craft project was always, you know, stuff those with your old used nylons, and I'm like, I don't want a quilt that's stuffed with somebody's used socks.
The only thing I've ever seen a used nylon used for is putting it on the on your outside dryer vent to catch the lint outside.
Yep.
It doesn't leave like a pile of crap.
Yes, that's also.
I feel that that's an acceptable.
That's acceptable. Yeah, that's something you take it off your foot. You put it on the end of.
You put it on something that's considered like dispelling trash.
And then you have a nylon full of dryer lint that you can put inside a quilt.
Yeah, some things I don't begrudge people necessarily that do recycle them, but they're just not things I'm prepared to recycle. Not in that way.
Yeah, for sure.
Can you tell me about that pretty quilt behind you?
Yes, that was the next thing I was going to talk about. So I put you back on the screen because I know that you'll probably have things to say. So this quilt I purchased from a friend who was doing her first vending, and Jill was with me when we went to.
Oh, okay.
Yes, this is from Amanda's booth. So our friend Amanda, it was her first time vending at the Penn Dry Goods show. And of course we wanted to support her. So I had gone and bought like some small items from her the first day, and I kept eyeballing this quilt. She had several quilts, and I kept looking at it, and I'm like, this is a really cool quilt. It's got some wild names on it. And so finally on the second day, right before, you know, the day ended, I was like, I'm going to pull the trigger. I'm going to buy this quilt. She had, you know, a wonderful price on it. I have to say, I was like, Amanda, charge more. But not yet, because I want to buy this quilt. But what's so funny, so she had done some very basic research on the names just to see, like, she bought it in Pennsylvania, and they are very Pennsylvania names, I can tell you that. And she had just done like a quick little search and found, I think, a few of the people, but not enough to determine like what this is. I'm almost positive it is a fundraising quilt because it's probably 98% names, but there are a couple businesses on here. So I suspect that this quilt was made for some type of fundraising, and then, you know, there were businesses that you know, put their names in here. But they're clearly families. It's circa 1930s. It's, you know, it's this kind of green is indicative of that era. And the names are hilarious. Now, so I will warn you guys, you know this about me by now. I am in my heart a 12-year-old still. So I will giggle about anything. And this also, you know, it's kind of, I don't know. I probably shouldn't say these things because this is coming from a woman whose last name is Dyke. But Lottie Wanker, who is on here, and John Dingler. No, is it Dingler? Yes, John Dingler. I think Lottie Wanker and John Dingler should get together. And I mean, please, I hope these people are not still with us. You know, again, thinking that this is probably from the 30s. Most of these people are probably no longer with us unless they were children. If they were children at the time, they may still be living, but for the most part, I think
you could have a wanker or a dingler in the chat.
I was like, oh my god, these poor people. And there's more than one dingler. There's more than one dingler on this quilt.
Well, you know, dingleberries don't come in ones. They come in groups.
There is only one wanker, though, that I have found so far. But I've been calling this the Quiggle quilt because there are a bunch of names, last name Quiggle, on here. And I'm like, what an awesome name, Quiggle. You know, not only it starts with a Q, not a lot of people have Q last names, and just it's a funny word, Quiggle. So and just also knowing that this is from Pennsylvania, it's probably from not too far away from me. it might be easier for, when I get around to charting it out and searching the names, I'll hopefully be able to get more information easily. That this one would be like a low-hanging fruit kind of research for these names.
Yeah, I can't imagine a wanker or a dingler is like hiding in the genealogy. That one's probably sticking out like a sore thumb.
Well, the Quiggles. I think the Quiggles are who Amanda looked at, and I think she called it the Quiggle quilt because she's like, I looked at that, because there are a number of Quiggles on here. There are also some just very, standard German, like Pennsylvania Dutch kind of names. So I'm thinking, like, again, I don't have any of this confirmed yet because I haven't done the research, but I'm kind of thinking some of these names really strike me as Pennsylvania Dutch, which is fairly close area to me. And so, like, Dietz and what was the one I was just looking at? Maus, M-A-U-S, Knapp, K-N-A-P-P. Like, those are sort of Germanish names. Guys White, I think that's probably Winkleman. Winkleman's a fun name.
That's cute.
Also, just from the perspective, I know old-fashioned names are like big again for children. People are naming their kids things like Esther. There's a lot of Beulahs on this quilt. Maybe Beulah's coming back. I don't know.
No, it's not. It's not.
But like from the perspective of like what names were popular, in the 30s or before, assuming these are all adults, the majority of them are adults, they would have been probably born at the turn of the century, maybe a little bit before. So, you can kind of make some generalized ideas about this area of Pennsylvania. There were a lot of Beulahs. That was a popular name. So, anyway, I thought it was cool. And this color green, I just love.
Yes, I agree. And now that I'm thinking about, like, I remember seeing that quilt, and I remember you hemming and hawing about it.
Yeah. Yeah, because I was like, you all know, I need another quilt like I need a hole in my head. I say this every time I buy a quilt. But it was in such good condition, and I wanted to support Amanda, and I loved the quilt. So I pulled the trigger.
And I am never one of those friends to help you, like, stay on budget. I'm always going to be the one that says, yes, buy the quilt.
Uh-huh. Yeah, she's a good friend like that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So you guys want to watch some Quilts in a Material World? I have not even taken a second to preview, just because I've been busy. So I'm excited to see what Susan Jerome has for this next episode. And then next month they'll be, or I guess it's really the end of this month because today's the 1st. We're moving in. So Susan was doing 2 parts. So her intro was 2 parts, and then we're moving into the next topic, and I can't remember what it is or who it is, but it's going to be another exciting one. And then Jill and we have an episode 2 where we'll be coming in a little bit later. I think we're September, aren't we?
We are September.
Yeah, I think our friend Molly might be next. I could be wrong. I'd have to look at the schedule. But anyway, I'm excited about this because, again, like the concept of material culture is, it's not a new topic. The concept's been around a long time in terms of like material culture studies. But it's kind of a new thing to me because I'm a baby researcher. Like a lot of this stuff was kind of these terms and processes and things were sort of new to me. So I hope it's interesting to you guys, as interesting as it is to me. So, you ready to go?
I'm ready.
Okay. Guys, let me know if the volume is not right or it's not coming through.
What is material culture? Part 2 with Susan Jerome. Susan J. Jerome is a collections manager at the University of Rhode Island Historic Textile and Costume Collection and the curator registrar for the
I'm not
University
hearing
of
anything.
Connecticut M. Estelle Sprague Costume Collection.
Okay. Uh-oh. Okay, so volume is low. Let me do this. Let me roll it back a little bit.
You guys, for when Steph and I have to do ours, I'm like dreading the fact that like I have to have this like little about the presenter thing with a photo. I've got to like take a photo.
Go get a glamour shot.
Oh my God.
Historic Textile and Costume Collection and the
Do those things
curator
even still
registrar
exist?
for the University of Connecticut M. Estelle Sprague Costume Collection.
Is that better, you
She
guys?
earned her MS degree from the University of Rhode
I
Island,
hear nada.
focusing on
Is that because
textile
you
and
have your
clothing.
headphones?
Ms. Jerome sits on the national board of the American Quilt Study Group and the Costume Society.
Okay, so Jill, you're gonna have to actually listen through either your phone or you're gonna have to try. I don't know if you have this pulled up as like another tab. That's how you're gonna have to listen to it.
Because the only thing I'm worried about is the sound coming through my speaker here. So I guess what I'm gonna have to do is I'm gonna have to mute myself
Yeah, if you can
until
do
we
that.
pause. Yeah,
Yeah.
until we pause.
Well, we're gonna have a better plan next time. This is gonna work.
Hey, this is all a learning experience.
It
So
truly
I'll
is, and I'm so sorry for the feedback, Jared. I know that probably blew your ears out. All right, okay.
Society of America Northeastern Region Advisory Committee. She writes and lectures on topics of clothing and needlework history.
Today we're going to take a second look at a quilt that I have in my possession. I'm going to start though with a few quotes that I think are important. I am going to read them just for those who may not be able to do so easily. The first one is from the Lowell Offering, which was a publication put together by young women who worked in Lowell, Massachusetts at the printing and textile mills in the 1840s. This is called the Patchwork Quilt, and it was written by somebody called Annette, but in actuality is Harriet Farley, who was one of the editors of the publication. And she writes, "Yes, there is the patchwork quilt, looking to the uninterested observer like a miscellaneous collection of odd bits and ends of calico, but to me it is a precious reliquary of past treasures, a storehouse of valuables almost destitute of intrinsic worth. Gentle friends, it contains a piece of each of my childhood's calico gowns, and of my mother's and sister's, and that is not all. I must tell you, and then you will not wonder, that I have chosen for this entertainment my patchwork quilt." And Harriet goes on to write this wonderful story about patchwork quilts, which you can find through the Hathi Trust. Go online, you can find the whole article. The second quote is from Lucy Law.
Okay, so sorry, I have to pause every now and then. Excuse me. The Lowell Offering. Jill, can you explain that because folks may not know what that is?
So the mill girls of Lowell, Massachusetts got together at a particular point, I don't know the dates off the top of my head, and created their own kind of magazine that they circulated amongst themselves called the Lowell Offering. And the girls themselves were the ones that were running it, writing for it. There are publications that have, I think most of them together, like in book form. And it's on my list of like things I want to look at, because if you are ever in Lowell to go to the New England Quilt Museum, just a couple of streets over is another museum called the Boot Cotton Mills Museum, and that is an original mill that still has one of the original working loom rooms that you can tour and things like that, and they have tons of those publications for things about the Lowell Mill Girls. There's been one of the professors from my undergrad did some archaeology on one of the boarding houses. All these girls had to live in boarding houses nearby. There's really cool stuff over there. So like that is a whole other thing worth investigating at a later date.
Very cool. Yeah, I didn't know anything about the Lowell Offering until I think we talked about it on Quilt Nerd with Mary Fons. I think she had brought it up in terms of something, some kind of New
Yeah, I think she showed like a snippet of one or something
New
like
England
that.
quilts or something. Yeah. So I just thought that was so cool. I was like, oh my gosh, these women, they usually we would consider a factory worker to be somebody who, maybe doesn't have aspirations like that or doesn't have the skills to, write and publish. But these ladies did. So I rolled this back a little bit because I wanted to see this. So she's going to repeat.
Wonderful story about patchwork quilts, which you can find through the Hathi Trust. Go online, you can find the whole article. The second quote is from Lucy Larkham. Another trial confronted me in the shape of an ideal but impossible patchwork quilt. We learned to sew patchwork at school while we were learning the alphabet, and almost every girl, large or small, had a bed quilt of her own begun, with an eye to future house furnishing. I was not over fond of sewing, but I thought it best to begin mine early. I could dream over my patchwork, but I could not bring it into conventional shape. My sisters, whose fingers had been educated, called my sewing goblins. I grew disgusted with it myself and gave away all my pieces except the pretty sea moss pattern, which I was not willing to see patched up with common calico. It was evident that I should never conquer fate with my needle. Now, Lucy.
Now that is interesting. You know, we know girls started quilting or sewing very, very young. But I mean, all of them, they weren't all good. Just because they make you start, I mean, we see all of these extant examples of things that are like, oh my gosh, a 7-year-old stitched this. But what about all of the ones that 7-year-olds stitched that looked like garbage? Like those apparently did exist. We just don't see them necessarily. But I love this gobblings.
I think it's interesting here that she's commenting how she's taught to sew at school.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was not aware anyone was doing patchwork at school. I thought that was strictly a home taught activity. But that changes the whole game if now like it's always going to be a school thing.
Well, and
because my first question would be is if it's not an all girls school, what are the boys doing while they're learning patchwork? Are they learning it too?
Maybe, probably not.
I feel like we read something at some point that talked about that.
Yeah, there's something gnawing at the back of my brain about that. But I do know, I mean, definitely in, you know, the beginning of public schools, you know, these little, and I mean, the thing is, like, organized public schools, I don't know what year that, like, you know, states began to organize schools, and then we have the federal, I mean, that's all 20th century. I'm pretty sure, you know, at this point, so this is 1889, these would have been kind of those little independent schoolhouses, like a little community comes up and they're like, well, we need to educate the children. So, you know, and I think it sometimes would have been probably the school teacher or whatever who might decide on that. But it seems to me, everything I've read, girls were getting a lot of, or could potentially get a lot of education in sewing at school. Yeah, I knew that. I'd seen that before. The samplers. Sometimes those samplers were the school projects. They were not necessarily the, you know, stitched at home.
Well, I can see those a little bit more just because it's often alphabets and numbers and like, you know, but I wouldn't have necessarily considered patchwork. I wonder if somebody's actually done full-on research about that in particular.
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, there's been lots of research I know about the samplers, but you know, I guess the challenge with quilts, if they're not, we don't have a name on a quilt. You know, like if it was something that where the child had to maybe turn it in as a you know, they might have their name or something on it, but we don't see a whole lot of that, I guess.
Please, kids when I was in school didn't even put their name on paper homework. Why would they put it on a quilt?
Oh, exactly.
Larka was a well-known author of her day. She wrote her A New England Girlhood, from which this quotation is taken, as sort of an autobiography later on in life. She grew up in Massachusetts, and when her mother was widowed in the 1840s, her mother became a supervisor for one of the boarding houses that was run by the mills themselves for the young women who worked in their mill houses. And Lucy herself began working in the boot mill in Lowell at the age of 11. The boot mill is now part of a national park, so you can visit it as well. She never married, and she certainly couldn't or didn't wish to conform to some of society's expectations of the day. I bring up both Harriet and Lucy because their words have influenced how we feel about quilts even today. Quilts come with many stories. Some are more accurate than others. And we're going to hear a few in this presentation. And I want you Think about this. What makes a quilt valuable? Is it because it's really old? Is it in very good condition? Maybe the design is interesting or unique. Perhaps the technical skill of the maker you feel may make the quilt valuable. Perhaps George Washington slept under it. The quilt that we're going to look at is this log cabin quilt. We're going to use some of the basic techniques of looking at a material culture study to analyze this particular log cabin quilt now in my keeping. A material culture study asks these questions: who, where, what, why, when, and how. So we're going to look at those things in analyzing this log cabin quilt. A material culture study involves looking at the artifact, the quilt. We're going to look at the history, material, construction, design, and function. And we're going to use identification, evaluation, cultural analysis, and interpretation, what you see along the right-hand side, in conjunction with history, material, construction, design, and function to sort of.
So I just wanted to stop here just to kind of look at these things, because I know she kind of is summarizing them. She doesn't have enough time probably in here to get really, really deep, but this is interesting stuff. You know, comparisons with other contemporary objects. I mean, that's important. The factual description, you know, I mean, I think that's probably where we need to be careful about getting into any kind of assumptions. Like you know, if this quilt isn't signed, if this quilt isn't dated, you can't say, oh, this is probably, right? That would be my assumption. You only can stick with your facts there.
Yeah, this actually reminds me of an archaeological article that was given to us in school that talks about if someone were discovering our bathroom like many, many, many years from now, and it's about, you know, kind of the context and the thing, and the person writing up the analysis, it ends up that the toilet seat is like a headdress and your toothbrush is like earring. Like it's hysterical. I actually should find it and send it out, because I remember going through all of this shenanigan for that. I think it was like archaeological methodology or something class.
Well, you know, I mean, what's funny about that is, I mean, you know, those are extreme examples, but I mean, think about the things that say, I mean, just as an example, like King Tut's tomb was opened in the 20s, and I'm sure that, you know, there were assumptions made about the things that they found, but then throughout the 20th century, you know, there were more discoveries, and I mean, there are some studies that are ongoing. Like, what's the one? It's SAQQ. I can't remember the Saqqara.
Saqqara. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so like that's a big ongoing study there, tombs, and so, you know, that more information is being discovered, and I can see where, you know, your analysis of things change. But yeah, you know, you can, like, I just think about things where with quilts we make these assumptions, and you have to be careful not to do that. And I know I'm a person who was always like, I don't know, but here's an idea. And I think that's all well and good, but you have to separate that from what we absolutely know that we can prove,
Yeah.
and, you know, because it's right in front of us versus what we can like conjecture.
Sort of analyze our quilt. This is the more academic approach to material culture study. You can also use this wonderful 8-page form that's available through the Quilt Index online. This asks you so many of the questions needed to analyze a quilt and to come to some conclusions and to understand some of the stories that a quilt may have. You can download this readily. It comes in PDF and Word online. If you need to have something that really organizes your analysis of a quilt, please use the Quilt Index form. It's really a wonderful device. So let's get started with the basics for our log cabin quilt. Provenance, the history of the piece. This quilt came to me from an acquaintance. He brought it into the shop in which I was working. I'm going to call him Peter, about 7 years ago. Peter's wife had recently passed away, and he didn't know what to do with the quilt. It was from her family. He thinks that she came from upstate New York, maybe around Albany area. Didn't know anything more about the quilts. So the provenance for this piece is fairly weak. Now, I could certainly do more research, more genealogical research on Peter's wife, I'll call her Barbara, on her family, where she came from. I have not done that. That is one avenue that still can be done to find out more about this quilt. It's important to know that both Peter and Barbara worked in museums. So they were both quite, I think, appreciative of old things. You know, they're not just willing to throw something away because it's old and it's worn out and it's tired. And they understand, I think each of them understands that an artifact has a place in today's world. Also, as Peter laid the quilt upon the table and we were beginning to unfold it, I had to understand that the quilt was part of Peter's working through the reflection of the grief that he had for his wife's passing. It's important for me to remember that. It's important for us to remember that that's part of the history of the piece and part of where the piece sits today in my sewing room. When was the quilt made? Well, we're going to look at what the fabrics and stuff.
So that's interesting that she's talking about that. I mean, in some ways, I'm interpreting like that as like there's some emotional stuff that's associated with an object, and you know, in terms of its whole story, it's not just about who made it, but it's in its place in this present or this future time, right? Like how is it being used then? Who is it impacting? I mean, I guess so. I may be stepping forward into something she's not into yet, but I mean, I guess you could look at it as a quilt that may have been utilitarian, or it was a quilt maybe that somebody made for a wedding, but now 100 years later, like, we're using it differently. Maybe we're using it or hanging it on the wall as art, and it's got a different emotional connotation, or you know, people's reactions to it are different than they might have been 100 years ago.
No, and that totally lends itself to those questions for collectors like myself, and how we feel when we're touching those objects is like, what life has this object lived?
Oh, I love that. What life has it lived? This quilt has seen many things.
Yeah. Well, and in that case, like if it was really emotionally significant to one generation and it gets passed on where it's removed from that original purpose and now it's hanging on the wall, it's art, it's lived two completely different lives at that point.
Well, as I told you, it really comes from a friend's family. So I'm going to assume that it was part of her family's household furnishings, and I can do more research on that. Why was the quilt made? And I think that's always an interesting question. Utilitarian? Creative? Perhaps both. Certainly the condition of the quilt says that it was well used. This is not a piece that was to be saved. It was a quilt to be put on somebody's bed. Log cabin quilt, with the barn raising placement of the lights in the darks. Measures about 84 by 84, you know, and like so many older things, it's not quite square. So the blocks, as you can see, about 14 inches. The strips are about 1.5 inches wide. The center block for each is about 3 inches. And it is made from a wide variety of printed fabrics, probably all of them cottons. From a distance, it doesn't look too bad, but it is definitely in poor condition. It has areas, quite a number of areas, where the textile has just disintegrated. There are numerous tears, overall soiling. It has been well loved. The backing is made up of a muslin, 4 different panels. It's not foundation pieced as some log cabin quilts are. It's entirely pieced and quilted by hand, but I think the backing pieces were machine sewn. And there's one area along the right-hand side where the strip has been pieced. You can see quite clearly there's machine sewing there. The fabric of the backing is nothing special. It has a lot of weaving mistakes in it, that kind of thing. So it really was utilitarian backing fabric. Other physical characteristics include the quilting pattern, which follows the line of the strips.
If I could just pause there. I think that it's an interesting observation that the backing, it has weaving mistakes. It was probably like a second, it wasn't the finest fabric. Therein, though, I think you could probably draw two conclusions if you really didn't have any provenance on the quilt. You could draw the conclusion that this was a utilitarian quilt. They didn't care so much, so they just used whatever. Or they didn't have the means to have something better, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, is that a valid observation of this? That without any provenance, she may have known that her friends' family, they were well off or they were middle class. They weren't living in poverty, so you could probably make the assumption that this is utilitarian. But if you really didn't know, I mean, I feel like that you probably can't make a really. I mean, you kind of have two or maybe more options there, I guess. I don't know. Maybe I'm getting too granular.
No, I think to a certain extent it could all be possible.
Each of the center blocks is a 3-inch square of this printed fabric, which is striped, and they're all set at diagonal. It is bound with a narrow applied binding, applied by hand, and it's a very tiny little floral pattern. Now, I did a little bit of fiber identification, and I wasn't particularly neat when I pulled out some little bits and pieces to put onto the microscope slide to stick it under the microscope. So what I've got there, I think, is probably a sewing or quilting thread, as well as some of the fibers from the batting. So we do have some wonderful cotton fiber spirals, spiral around just as we would assume a cotton batting to do. But there are some fibers which seem to come from that thick thread that you see that look to be as if they were mercerized. They're flat. They don't.
Okay, I had to pause there because now you know what mercerized means. I have to admit, I think I had heard at one time what mercerized kind of means, but she's got the specifics here, so you were about to learn, if you didn't already know. Developed by John Mercer in 1844, you would treat the fibers with a sodium hydroxide solution to improve tensile strength and the fiber's ability to take up dyes. So I'm guessing mercerizing is strengthening as well as, well, not a mordant, but print ready or dye ready for the fiber. I also think, at least with threads, I think mercerized threads are, they're smoother. That, when you're sewing, they're less likely to get that, fluffy stuff that starts to shred the threads.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Don't spiral very much, and they have very fat edges to them. And this will help us to identify the time period for the quilt and push it later on into the 19th century. This process of mercerization, although it was developed in the middle of the 19th century, really was not used until more towards the end of the 19th century. And you find it being used in cotton threads because the process improves the tensile strength of the thread. And I always like to do sort of a little bit of microscopic research, kind of fun. Evaluating the quilt by looking at contemporary quilts from the time and the place, I did go to the Quilt Index and I looked to see how many quilts they had from New York that were log cabin quilts. Well, there are 31 quilts that are in the Quilt Index that are from New York and have a log cabin pattern. Some of you might know, some of you may not know, that log cabin quilts come in a wide variety of sort of sub patterns. So you've got your block, but you can take the lights and the darks and you can turn them to different angles, and you can have many variations. The one that I'm looking at is a barn raising pattern. So you have lights and darks in a diamond around the quilt. You can have windmill variation. There's courthouse steps, which is kind of a fun one. There's lightning streaks, all different kinds of variations to the theme. Pineapple as well. The log cabin quilt pattern, however, is made of having a center piece, often red, and then working around the piece, you add strips going around of lights and darks until you create your single block. Traditionally, the center is red. And sort of stories say that, oh, it's the chimney of the house around which the lights and darks might be the good and bad elements of life. I don't know, it's a nice sort of little story. There are other theories, however, and I did spend a little time looking at some of the more interesting theories as to where the log cabin pattern may have originated. One of the more horrific ideas, horrific for so many reasons, is that the tombs of Egypt with their mummies, both people as well as cats, may have been a design influence.
I love these images of the mummies, and I don't think that it is horrible or gruesome. I think it's really cool. And I wonder, I seriously wonder, is this where like the idea of log cabin came from? That the visual, of every time the wrap is made, it makes another,
Mm-hmm.
if this is not the beginning of that thought process, it's still pretty cool that you've got cats wrapped in log cabins, right?
No, I mean it also is just, it is also potential that all these things just came about organically in each different culture. It's like every culture in the world has a flood story kind of a thing.
Right. Yep.
Even if they never had any contact.
Yeah. So and from that perspective, it could be like the Egyptians are the first documented people that had sort of a log cabin-esque design in the things they did, whereas some other culture could have come about that same look, organically.
Yeah, I think even there's some stuff in Mesopotamia, but a lot of that is now lost. This would be the first thing that we have like leftovers.
Right. That's why I said documented, because
Yeah.
you can always assume there was an earlier civilization that we just don't have the proof. I just love these cats. I think they're great.
I think there's reproductions of them
around a central block.
Are you serious? Like you could buy
I think you can buy these. There is there's a company called Design Toscano, I think it is. They do a lot of repro stuff of like archaeological discoveries. And I think I've seen these, yeah.
I do know I recently saw something about this. I was searching something and they came up, and I've seen it before. But what they said was, I guess there's some more recent ones that they've gotten, and they x-ray these because they're afraid they don't want to unwrap them, that they may never get them back the way they're supposed to be.
Yeah.
And boy, do I know that feeling. If you've ever opened a new set of sheets, decided you want to get them back into that little zipper pouch, it's never going to happen.
Never.
That we see in our log cabin quilts. I'm not so sure, but it could have been one of the influences that one may see. Somebody might have looked at it and said, oh, isn't that an interesting pattern? How can I do that on a flat piece of fabric? Other theories suggest that some of the land cultivation techniques in England and Europe, perhaps the way the land was laid out or tilled, might have influenced a pattern that looks like a log cabin pattern. Also, perhaps the way people put tiles or other materials onto a roof may have been an influence for a log cabin pattern. In the United States, maybe our presidential campaigns helped to influence the rise of popularity of these quilts. Who knows? I do, however, respect Barbara Brackman when she says that the log cabin quilts first popped into print during the Civil War, the design of a square framed by rectangular logs, becoming a late 19th century fad, so popular that county fairs created categories just for log cabins. So certainly this log cabin quilt that we're looking at today will be set in the second half of the 19th century. And I think because of the mercerization process, we're going to push it a little bit towards the last decades of the 19th century. But it's certainly not an unusual pattern, nothing new here, very popular. Fits right into being a quilt that one would expect to see from upstate New York and in the 19th century. Now, in looking at textiles themselves, they can help to date the quilt. Those who look at these textiles really can help to maybe narrow down the time period because there are so many.
I just have to quickly stop here to say I think this is what most quilt historians spend an absurd amount of time on. Because without provenance and without a name on a quilt and without a date on a quilt, like, this is what you've got pretty much to figure it out. So I feel like the conversation around fabrics is just never ending, and it's very cool. You learn so much from it when you pay attention to people talk about this. It also stresses me out like to no end because I always make like the wild ass guesses. And I'm 90% of the time I'm wrong. And it's like I almost feel like you could study this for a lifetime, and still have some that you have a question mark on because you've never seen it before.
Printed cottons on this quilt, so many of them. And they come in a wide variety. There are geometrics, there are stripes, there are polka dots, there are circles, many, many different floral patterns as well. There are larger patterns and smaller patterns. Many different patterns. They just keep going on and on and on. And then there are also fabrics that have numbers printed on them. Now, what is this suggesting to us? This is why it's important to take a second look at a quilt and not dismiss it because of its age or because of its condition. I mean, you can see clearly here, this quilt kind of has a lot of surface dirt on it, but it tells a very intriguing story. What do these strips suggest? Well, they suggest that somebody had access to perhaps the ends of bolts or the beginning of a bolt, or perhaps somebody had access to fabrics from a printing mill. Once I started looking at the fabrics, and
I feel like I would take it a step farther and say that, they were perhaps limited in their fabrics, or, they didn't want to waste any of their fabrics, so they used those pieces. Where if somebody was either making a quilt that's not utilitarian, like a fine quilt, or somebody who has access to lots of fabric, like yardage instead of scraps, they probably would not use those pieces, right?
Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, today I can't imagine somebody, well, people do like to use selvages for particular projects, but for the most part, most people, when they're making a quilt, they're not going to like just let the selvages be in there because that will disrupt, if they're want their particular patterns and layout and everything to look. But if you think you're trying to squeeze every last little bit and it doesn't matter, or it's not as big of a deal what it looks like, then yeah, what's the big deal about having some selvage or having something like a I don't know, a mark on a piece of fabric or something.
Mm-hmm.
Was glad that I could do this when Peter was there. We got a little excited about this quilt. Is that different colorways started popping up all over the place on this quilt. Different colorways means that it's the same printed pattern but done in different colors. And you can see clearly, particularly in the lower right hand side, you have the same pattern, but one is red, one is dark blue. Above it, one blue, one is light blue, one is dark blue. And then we have to the left, we have two of the same printed designs but in different colors. Sort of one is a burgundy-ish color and the other one is a dark blue. Well, once you start to see them, you see them everywhere. Everywhere. And once you start to see them, you see them everywhere. But it gets even better. Looking around, I saw a fabric with just stems and what looked like some petals on it. And then you can see there's a fabric that looks like it just has petals on it and then little dots. And then suddenly you see the fabric that occurs when you put those two pieces together. So we have examples of the cylinder that printed the red part of the design separate. So perhaps somebody was running it through just to make sure it was working properly. Then we have the cylinder that was printing the dark blue part of the design, maybe running it through, making sure everything was working correctly. And then we have the final product on the right, the red and the blue together, that creates the red and blue flower on the white fabric. And this is where this particular quilt became very interesting to me.
That is interesting.
Just so that you understand how small it is, you can see here our red and blue flowers and the inches out. So these are rather small, these figures that you see printed here. The printing cylinders really began in the latter part of the 18th century. So somebody took the copper plates, which were flat, that had to be printed, stamped, if you will, in order to decorate fabric, and decided that it would be better if they were cylinders. Cylinders can roll over the fabric or they can spin and the fabric is passed through the machine. And so by the latter part of the 18th century, the improvements to these machines were such that it was possible to print 6 colors at one time. So the fabric is running through a machine that is printing, that has 6 cylinders to it, and it's printing 6 different colors all at once. Imagine, economically speaking, how wonderful that is.
That must have been a big deal,
faster
too.
you can print your textiles and get them out to the market.
Yeah, when you think that that's coming
And
out
once you start
in the late 1700s, so that means they're going through all of the 1800s with access to that kind of printing. That kind of like blows my mind.
It does, it does, and I think a lot of times, I mean, and this just might be my limitation in terms of what I know about history, but when I think of the Industrial Revolution, I always think of like Henry Ford and stuff like that. That's actually a different part of the Industrial Revolution. That's like the mechanization of the Industrial Revolution was much earlier than the things that we think of as streamlining factory processes and all that stuff. So, Industrial Revolution really started with coal-powered things and not electricity, the way I kind of always thought. And, yeah, I think it was a big deal for me when I learned that, yeah, it was in the late 1700s when this stuff was happening. And it's like, oh, we've had this technology for a long time then.
Yeah, and what kind of bums me out, though, is that it's not like we always talk about our, when you were saying, like, we're always looking at fabrics to learn about a quilt, and often it's not that common to see things earlier than like 1840-ish, which bums me out because if we're having, let's say, complex colored fabric, because being able to print 6 colors at a time, that's pretty sophisticated.
Yeah,
Like, we
it is.
talk about now what it's like to put multiple colors on a t-shirt for a printing press.
Hmm.
So like to have all of that, but not a ton of it survives. I'm hoping now that we're gonna find some hoard somewhere
Yeah,
of
I
a
think,
bunch of fabric.
yeah. I mean, of course, what we know is that so many things were just worn out. They, they got used until they didn't exist anymore, or they were refashioned, or, yeah, I mean, there's just not a whole lot that still exists from the 18th century, just because of the culturally, they they didn't have fast fashion. Even I guess even if they could print 6 colors, it wasn't like as fast. Um, and I would say that we do have examples because they're the things like the chintz
Mm-hmm.
prints. There's a little bit of that stuff left over, but yeah, you're right. It's kind of frustrating that we don't have access to things earlier to, as examples of this, as readily.
Seeing these fabrics, you can see them everywhere. In the upper left-hand corner, we've got our red sort of little fabrics here. If you go across to the right-hand side, upper area, you've got the red and the blue. If you look down to the lower right, well, suddenly that design is red and blue and combined. And if you look across the way to the lower left, we've got our light and dark blue stems with the petals being printed onto a striped background. But if you look very closely across the way to the lower right hand side, you can see that same pattern, but it's being printed onto something with circles. So the different colorways are just everywhere on this particular quilt. And I think that really is the beauty of this quilt. The presence of these incomplete prints and the different colorways and such sort of reinforces the idea that the person who made this quilt, or someone within the maker's social circle, um, worked in a printing mill and had access to these different seconds, runoffs, whatever we want to call them, scraps, that kind of thing. Now, more research can be done to see if they were cotton printing mills in the Albany, New York area. I don't really know. That is another avenue down which I can travel in order to get more information about this particular quilt. Once you start seeing the different colorways,
I was gonna say, what is cool when you do, if you can get down to that level of information, like you researched a family because this stuff came from a family, and then you start to do the research and you find out, oh, well, so and so's brother or so and so's father worked in a mill, so he must have been the source of the fabric. Then that tells us that it may have been his wife or daughter that made the quilt. You can start
Mm-hmm.
to narrow it down, and that's such a cool discovery when you find those things. You're like, ah, this is the missing piece. Like this helps. I mean, it probably with many of these situations, it never clarifies it right down to literally the person that made the quilt. But when you have these large family units, and you can like really start to put pieces together when you find out about the people themselves. That's so exciting.
Agreed.
ways, they are everywhere. And the three different colorways that you see here show a very Oriental influence. Oriental influence, you can see it after particularly the Centennial Exposition of 1876. People began to be very interested because they could see the designs from China and Japan that were in the different exhibits in Philadelphia in that year. You'll also see that wonderful burgundy color. It's above to the right, very popular in the last decades of the 19th century. And if you look closely across the top of the left-hand block, you can see that light blue color. Again, very popular in 1880, 1890, and in the early 20th century. Ah, geometrics, circles everywhere, spots everywhere. Again, very popular, particularly in the latter part of the 19th century. I mean, we really, I think, can place this quilt in the last 2 decades of the 19th century, or perhaps in the first decade of the 20th century. And there's one little interesting thing to note. Oh, at the top, that dark blue fabric, which has white polka dots on it, if you look closely, you can see that all of those white polka dots really don't have any fabric in them. And it's an example of discharge dyeing. So the fabric has been dyed blue, dark blue, probably with indigo dye. And then somebody has come along and the discharge dye is placed onto the dark blue fabric to take the dye away. So the polka dots were dyed afterwards with something to bleach the blue out, and it has deteriorated the cotton quite nicely so that all of those little um, probably white dots are no longer there. I mean, I can just go on and on now about this quilt. There's so much to see. Um, there's nothing unusual about it at the time, and it was certainly made for utilitarian reasons. It's been well used. It shows creativity in the use of the log cabin design as well as the barn raising pattern and such. I think it's interesting that the person who made this quilt seems to have had access to a sewing machine because the backing was pieced by machine, but all the other work was done by hand. Piecing of the different strips as well as the quilting was done by hand. I think that's said something about the maker of the quilt. And what else does it say to us today? It shows us certainly quite a bit about printing techniques in the latter part of the 19th century, how these small florals were put together. It shows us that somebody thought that these fabrics were all very valuable. They put them into a quilt that they spent quite a bit of time working on. And they didn't mind the fact that they had some that were just the stems of the floral pattern, or the petals of the floral pattern, or actually had the numbers on them from the end of the bolt, or whatever those numbers signify. This person used all of those fabrics in order to make this quilt. And I think it shows that the maker had, I think it shows that the maker treated those fabrics with care, that they were of value to that person. What does it mean to me today? Well, I am still thinking of what I'm going to do with it. So I think I'm going to fold it back up again and put it away for another time. But certainly this quilt, regardless of its condition, regardless of the fact that there's nothing special about it, has quite a story to tell for all of us. The Quilt Index organizes much of the descriptive data that you can use for your own material culture study. And I would certainly suggest that you go and look at what they have to offer. And the American Quilt Study Group is the organization to which I belong. If you want to learn more about quilts, become a part of a group that is thinking about quilts past, present, and future, please think about going online, looking up our organization, and joining. And then there is a little bit of a bibliography if you want to learn more about quilts, quilt history, textile history. Thank you very much.
Oh, very cool. So
Yeah,
I
that was good.
hope you guys learned something. I know I did. And Druid said, I thought that same thing, that whoever made this quilt worked in a mill. Girl, I think that you should look at doing some imperial culture studies. I think that you would be good at that. So I'm gonna pop in the chat. That's the link if you wanted to watch it again. I know that the audio may have been kind of funky, so. But yeah,
Well,
I mean, I think.
before you,
Oh, go
oh,
ahead. Sorry.
go ahead. I was just gonna say before you move on to anything else or something, I have to pop off. I've got an appointment. Um, and now would be a good time to sneak off so that they don't show up and I just go, bye.
No, that's perfect. So I'm gonna work on something else. But yeah, thanks for dropping in here. I know I sprung this on you, but I'm really glad to have you here because you have sort of a background in this kind of stuff as far as your archaeology and your religious manuscripts and all that stuff that you studied. You've got more of a one-to-one experience than I do, so I appreciate
No,
it.
thanks so much for having me, guys.
Yeah. All right, we'll see you later. Bye, Jill.
Bye.
Okay. So, it's just us now, guys. So what I was gonna sort of do for the duration here is to do my. Sorry, I'm trying to do. Let's see. I wanted to do. I wanted to make batting with you guys. I'm trying to spit it out. Spit it out, Stephanie. Yeah, I want to work on my batting project, so I have to clear my desk off a little bit. And what I was wigging out before we got on here, Jill and I were talking, and I was like, the thing I had to do earlier today, like I said, it was my other job, basically. And I didn't get to set up my desktop the way I wanted to because. So I'm at a little bit of a loss here. I'm kind of scrambling. All right. So let me clear my desk off here. You can see that. Okay. So I know you guys have probably seen this before, but just for anybody who might be watching, I sort of wanted to show my little educational device here. And I have it in a meal planning thing because it just worked perfectly to put the little quadrants in here, or the little, not quadrants, triads, I don't know. Anyway, these things are kind of useful. So here I have the cotton bowl and the little stem piece that goes with it, and it's this end. So I'm gonna go pick some cotton. That's what you're gonna see when you've got fresh, ripe cotton. And today it is almost entirely machine picked, and I didn't grab my bag of machine picked cotton. Machine picked cotton looks as horrific as you would expect it to. It's full of debris. It's full of crunched up pieces of this and the leaves and the stems and all that stuff. So when it would go through the cotton ginning process, and the cotton ginning process today is much more complicated, and but it's essentially the same process. It's like this, these are being sent through something that literally like chews it up and squeezes the seeds out. And these are some seeds. But it would squeeze the seeds out, and then it creates a situation where the pieces of debris are starting to fall out, and they keep putting it through these refining processes so that then eventually you get like this nice clean cotton. But when you handpick cotton, you can get this beautiful, these beautiful, perfect little cotton bolls, and that's what I have here in this bag. I have started working on a quilt. I made batting, and I still have like gobs of this. It's amazing how much a pound of hand-picked cotton will get you. I don't think that this would make a full quilt, but I have gotten a lot of layers out of this, so that's kind of exciting. And so again, the seeds, when you pull those out, this particular variety of cotton seems to want to hold on to its seeds. And I'll pull open a piece in a minute, but you see like the cotton fiber sticks to the seeds. That makes it like really complicated. I mean, it's just a lot of, you have to expend a lot of energy. Oh, Druid, yes. So you felt those pieces in quilts before and made you want to pick it out. Yeah. You'll often hear people say, oh, this one's still got the cotton seeds in it. It's not actually the cotton seed. It's a piece of debris. And it might be a chunk of cotton seed, but it's not the full seed because, I mean, as you can tell, a cotton seed is about the size of like a kernel popcorn, a popcorn kernel. So could one get by the process? Yeah, sure. But typically what you're feeling in there are going to be like little pieces of debris. And, you definitely can feel that in there or see it. You can also see it sometimes when you've got something that's threadbare. You've got these little tiny bits of debris. And, when you see something that's like unbleached cotton, sometimes unbleached cotton will have little bits in there. And again, it's that debris that gets in there. My husband doesn't like these containers for food prep because they're a little leaky. So they don't snap down like tight enough. So like if you put some salad in here, the dressing's gonna leak. So I've repurposed a lot of these for just projects, but okay. So let me put this back together. My little educational tool. It does have little divots that lock it together, but okay. So this is the piece that I have been working on. This random. Oh gosh, it's so dark. Let me see if I can. Because it's navy blue, it doesn't. My light over here doesn't want to catch it very well, but you can see like I transferred my design and then I made my quilt sandwich. That wouldn't necessarily be the process if you were putting like a whole quilt into a frame. They might mark it section by section, or some people mark the whole thing. So that's kind of, I guess, an independent maker's process, but I just kind of quilting this in my lap because it is just a little piece. It's not very big. It's like, what's this, like 12 by 12. I think I'm going to end up putting it in a small hoop though, because it wants to like kind of pucker up, just because of this batting is not like batting that you go and buy today. The batting that you get today is nice and flat. It's needled together at the factory so that it's like I'm speaking to the choir here. I preach to the choir, you guys. If you make any quilts, or you have quilts, you kind of know this. You know what this is like, and this is so very different. It's just got a different hand to it. Having not done any really much quilting on it yet, it feels different. It feels very loose. So that's one thing, big thing that's different. So what I thought I would do, I guess, given the time I have left here. So this is what I did with that navy blue beforehand. This is a peach colored fabric. Okay, maybe you can see it better. Probably getting the print on the back. I'm gonna take this apart. I use safety pins so that I could keep it all together. Safety pins are one of those things that they're so much nicer when you use old ones, because today I just feel like you can't get very good safety pins today. So I think you can, it's very light, but you can see I marked out my design. And so what I'm going to do is start building my batting here. So, and I don't have a whole lot left, so you're actually going to have to watch me make and card some batting. And I think there's a cat underneath my desk poking his head into the batting. So here is one bat I made, but I think this is too thick. This is 3 layers of bats, and I think this is too thick. What I've made on the navy blue one is just 2 layers. And I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. So, but just the way I layered these, like this over here is a little bit thicker. This is a little bit thinner. So, it's one of those things where you're not going to come up with something that is nice and neat and factory like when you're hand processing this, but you can still get it very neat. It's and it really, it wants to stick to itself. So that's the good thing. Even though it's still loose and fluffy, it still wants to stick to itself. So this, I'm just going to roll this up. Put that away. And then, by the way, this is my template. I went to a couple of quilt shops not long ago, and nobody had plastic templates. They just don't have them anymore. People just don't use them. I'm sure that there's some of the quilt shops in my, in my area probably do have it. But just to be quick about it, I literally printed this off from something I found online. It was small. I scaled it up, in Adobe and then printed it out. And then I used, I don't know, the tip of something pointy to kind of poke holes in this. And then I put it down, on my fabric and just used a little marking pen to go through each of the little divots, the little holes I poked. So, that's a common older method of doing this. So, all right, now let me get my bag back. And I'm going to show you what this process is like. It's not as time consuming as you think it is. It's the kind of thing that was fun doing while I watched TV. Because you kind of don't really have to look at it. I mean, with sewing, if you're stitching, you kind of want to look at what you're stitching, but with this, you kind of don't have to. So this is one of the lobes of a cotton boll, and there are probably 9 seeds in here. I think I could feel 8 or 9 seeds in there. So what I was doing that kind of helped was to sort of tear apart a little bit around the seed and then just pull it out. So you kind of just get into a process of doing that. And from what I've read, there's different varieties of cotton, and there is a variety called Sea Isle cotton, I believe. I think that they grow it in some of the islands off of, in the UK. I think they grow it. I don't know, what this is not Sea Isle cotton, I can tell you that, because these things are really hard to get out. But apparently the cotton fibers don't clutch the seed as much with Sea Isle cotton. Apparently the seeds they're not as hairy or whatever. The coating on them, or the husk or whatever, doesn't hold on to the cotton fiber as much. So when they gin it, it kind of they almost squeeze the seeds out versus tearing the cotton up to get the seeds out. This particular variety was grown in North Carolina. At a farm in North Carolina. I think it's probably not too far from where my dad lives, in eastern North Carolina. So, okay. It's all the seeds. That's all the seeds that were in this little bit of cotton. So, you can see, the productivity of this. Has it been genetically modified? So I do know that they do some genetic modifications on cotton, but I don't know about this particular one that I have. I don't remember him having anything on his website about, and I bought this up from the guy off of Etsy. I think he sells it to knitters that want to spin cotton, or spinners that want to spin cotton to put into yarns and stuff for knitting and crochet. But as far as the Sea Isle cotton, I do not believe that's genetically modified. I think it's just a variety that the seeds just come out easier. Now, in terms of genetic modification, has somebody worked with Sea Isle cotton maybe to, I don't know. I mean, it's certainly a possibility. Cotton is big business, so you know, it's definitely potentially that they have. But also, I think all of this stuff, yeah, it could have mutated itself, and I'm certain that that's with the sea isle cotton, because I want to say it's like the Orkney Islands or something like that. I feel like I read somewhere that they grew sea isle cotton there. Um, you know, so it's just a variety that happens to be easy to pull the seeds out. But today, you know, with the factory processes, I mean, I think it doesn't matter. You know, it's really these varieties that, if you're going to have to do this by hand, you would want a variety maybe that is easier to process. So, yeah, this is pretty much what what's happening here. Now, I do know that people who did process that, you know, grew a small cotton crop to use specifically for their own, you know, their own quilts and cotton beads. I don't know. Could you make your own cotton swabs? I suppose you could. Your own, like, you know, cottony things. But they also would make their own devices. I've seen, you know, pictures from, like, say, the 30s, the 20s and 30s, where people on farms would make their own, like, cotton gin or their own thing. And it was basically just rollers that would kind of squeeze the seeds out. So, yeah, Druid, so the seeds have followed easy enough. I don't know how well that works with cotton. I don't know. I know that, yeah, I won't even say anything, because I really truly don't know how all that works. You know, in terms of the cotton, if the cotton were just left onto its own devices, you know, it opens up, you know, the thing opens up, and then, you know, I would assume eventually all of this would, you know, fall back down into the soil, and then these things would get buried and regrow, in theory. But I don't know how, from a factory or farming operation, how they handle that. You know, I mean, you know, do you have a packet of cotton seeds that you open and, like, you poke a hole and you put one? I'm not sure. I don't know. So, but yeah, so if you hung out with me and Jill for quilt nerding when we were reading the Tallulah Bottoms book, Legacy, there was a description in there where she was responsible when, you know, she was a child and she was bedridden from illness. She was responsible for making cotton bats. You know, her stepmother was like, you know, she kept her working even though she couldn't get out of bed. Like, good Lord, let this poor child, you know, get well. But yeah, she made cotton bats from her sick bed. And I'm pretty sure this is exactly what she was doing, was picking the seeds out and then making little bats with the combing. Yeah. So growing in clay mud, the strands on it to cling to the soil, maybe? Yeah. You know, I have a brown thumb. I will tell you that. I cannot grow things to save my life. I can keep a couple of cats and a kid alive. That was and right now I just keep a couple cats alive. I'm terrible with plants. I don't know a whole lot about plants and you know, all this stuff. So yeah, once it's grown, I'll work with it, but getting it to grow, no. Well, you know what, Drew? This would be a great project for you. I'll send you all my seeds, and you could grow a little cotton patch and see. take this project further. Yeah, Jill and I joked about, like, should we grow our own flax? Like, no, I am not going that far. I absolutely cannot do that. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, could you grow your own little potted cotton plant? I don't know. It's worth a try, I'm sure. If anybody wants seeds, let me know. And then the cotton seeds actually, you know, they can express cotton seed oil. And, you know, I don't know how they do that. Like, these things just are put under pressure, I guess. Like you'd get any other kind of squeeze something else for oil, you know, like olive oil or whatever. So I assume that, yeah, they would get put into something and smashed. But I got plenty of seeds if anybody wants some. So you say the word and I'll mail them to you. Yeah, so like I said, this is just, you just keep going. You don't have to look necessarily. You just have to feel your way through. And the fact that there is like up to 9 or 10 seeds in every lobe of this thing. You'd think cotton is definitely a hardy plant. It's not skimping on its seeds. Okay, I'll send you some. You're growing a lemon tree. That's very cool. I've always wanted to do that, to grow a citrus tree in a pot. So, all right, well, I'm going to send you some. You ask and you shall receive. All right, so I've got a little ball of cotton here. So let's do the next step, which is combing it. Now, I have, my little combs are really, they're mini combs that are typically used for, oh my gosh, so you could braid it. Oh, that is so cool. What did they call that? Esplanade or something like that. Where you can, they do the fancy stuff with the, all right, where is my, here we go. Oh, very cool. Very cool. So these are the combs I have. And these are, like I said, they're for like needle felting. If you buy, you could buy the wool and, comb your own stuff for needle felting. For people that would be processing raw fiber, spinners, they typically would have larger ones of these. And you can process, obviously, much more with a larger one. You'd have more surface area and make a larger bat. But those are kind of expensive, but I'd say believe it or not, but I'm sure you can believe me. So the way that you use these is like this. So, and cotton does not lend itself to this combing process as nicely, in my opinion, as wool does. Wool is hair. It wants to be brushed. Cotton doesn't necessarily. So anyway, like you charge or load the brush, and this might actually be too much, and then you're gonna take it like this, and you're gonna comb it. And let me switch back to my other screen so that I can kind of see this. So I'm taking it and I'm combing it until I kind of get it smooth. You can see there's like more cotton. It's not distributed very well. So you kind of comb it and get the fibers lined up. And there's this big hunk there. Probably looks like it's got some debris in it. I pull that out. Anyway, so, and now you have these, combed fairly well. And then let me switch back to my other camera so you can see this better. There is a fancy way that the people that spin do, like where they go and they make themselves like a little roll. We don't necessarily want to do that. We don't necessarily want to flip this into a roll. We want it in a sheet. So what I've been doing is to kind of grab the loose stuff here and just carefully pull it off of the brush, the card. This is called a card. And you'll get this piece. And you can see, this is not perfect by any means. That's why this is, again, this is a super inefficient way to do this. There are much better ways to do this. But if this is all you have, this is what you do. Let me switch back. So you can see then what I've done here is, if you look at these pieces, the bottom of it, where it was, coming off the bottom of the card, is a little bit more like beardy. It's a little bit like, just sparse. So I can kind of lay these things out so that they sort of overlap a little bit, and it helps with the thickness. Now, I don't want to have that little gap there. I want this to be, fairly even and not have any holes in it. Now, the next thing I would do, so this would be one layer, and I discovered one layer is not enough. You really need multiple layers if you're doing the batting this way. Oh, Druid, yeah, they do look like pet brushes. They do. And I joked about it. One of my other, our cakey nerds, I haven't seen her in a while, but she spins and knits as well. And she's like, well, yeah, they look like pet brushes, but they are supposed to be a little bit stronger. Like the needles are a little bit stiffer than you would have on a pet brush because, you don't want to like hurt your pets. But this needs to stand up to this process. So it sounds like the steel that they make the needles out of is just a little bit, they're a little bit longer and they're a little bit stronger. So this, I probably didn't put enough on there. So I kind of, now the question is, am I doing this the right way? I'm not 100% sure. I've, just what I've read, just what I've seen, what I know. I've taken classes in basic spinning, and of course that was all with wool. That wasn't with cotton. So now you see that's fairly even. So what I would do is, imagine I've got more pieces here. Then I would take the second group of these and lay them like this. So they're perpendicular. And then that way, if you've got this second layer, you could kind of do thin layers. And then by turning them, then you're covering up any holes. And so then you just keep doing that. And what I did, I have these little boxes that I save. I get meal kit deliveries and stuff, and they put these kind of cool little boxes in there, and so I recycle them. I use them for projects and stuff. But what I did when I was making my bats earlier, let me take that out. Got all these things in this box. I just put them here in the bottom, and I would start to build, knowing that my fabric was going to be about this big. It ends up being a little bit bigger, and I had to kind of overlap some stuff, but I would just put it here in the box, and I just kind of kept building until then I ended up with a big bat, and that was this is 3 layers that was in this one. So, and then, then once I would have this, then, this is the big bat, and yes, I do. I have an interloper. He wants to know what's going on. Then I would just, for a larger quilt, a larger piece, then I would have to like overlap these. And, again, you want it to be even. So if you're putting together a bunch of bats, then, you kind of have to overlap them and make sure that, you're not making it like big and chunky. Oh yeah, he's got an interesting relationship with boxes. If I bring a box in like off of the porch, or I need to take things out of it, he's afraid of it. But now the box is stationary, it's not being moved or carried around. Well, then it's an interesting box. It's a box for looking in, climbing in, biting. He likes to bite the edges of the box. So but anyway, that's pretty much it. Like it's not a difficult process. It's just time consuming. And, would I want to do this for a whole quilt? I mean, if I had plenty of time and, I could just be working on this, or have, like a child, or, somebody working on this. And, historically, when you had multi-generational, families, people living in a home all together, you would have children who could help with some of the chores, and elderly relatives too. And so this is the kind of stuff that, they can't necessarily do hardcore labor, but they could do things like this. So I think if I had time, if I had, somebody who was able to just keep making little bats, it wouldn't be a big deal to me to make a whole quilt with this. But the thought of trying to put it together, on a schedule, trying to get it done quickly, oh, no ma'am. Yes, he does smell good. If you are not a cat person, you probably don't understand we call that cat huffing, or you just bury your face in them. Because a nice clean cat is just the best. So, all right, buddy, you're here because you're hungry, I'm sure, and there was a box and there were things being done. So but yeah, when you see somebody sneaking up on me, it's usually him. He can't help himself. So he's being very good today. Usually he's not this good. So in their ears, oh yeah, you smell good. It's probably an acquired taste. People that don't have cats, I'm sure, don't get it. So I know people always say puppies smell good, and I'm like, I don't necessarily love the smell of a puppy. The smell of a kitten is much better. All right, you guys. Well, I hope that was interesting, informative, and I'm going to keep working on my cotton, and I'll have more to report after I've done some more of this and some more of the actual hand quilting of the piece. So I'll hand piece both of those. So with that, I'm going to hop off because I got to get back to the thing I was doing this morning. I would much rather be here with you guys because, hanging out and talking quilts is much better. But, work calls. So yay! I'm glad it was good. So I will see you guys on Monday, and I'm gonna work out some hijinks this weekend to see what we can do on Monday. That'll be fun. Yeah, so happy Friday Eve. It is always good to, be heading into the weekend. And I hope you have a wonderful weekend. And I hope you have a super, super evening tonight. And we're in a, knife fight. Yeah, I actually, my eczema has been like off the chain lately. And I don't know if it's stress or the weather or what. But yeah, I have bandages on there just to keep it from, yeah. Anyway, all right, you guys have a wonderful, wonderful evening and weekend, and thank you as always for being here because I couldn't do this without you, and I truly appreciate every time you watch one of my videos, every time you show up. I love you guys. So I'm gonna say goodbye. You gonna say goodbye, Starscream? I will catch you guys later.